The eviction notice sat on the dashboard of Claire Hendricks' 2004 Honda Civic like a death sentence. The words, "Final Notice, 72 hours," blurred by the tears she refused to let fall while her 8-year-old daughter Mia slept in the back seat. 3 jobs in 6 months, each one ending the same way. Daycare emergencies, sick days she couldn't afford to take, employers who smiled sympathetically while handing her termination papers. Now it was 11 p.m. on a Tuesday in November, and they were parked behind a 24-hour laundromat in Trenton, New Jersey, with $47 to their names and nowhere left to go. Claire's phone buzzed against the passenger seat. Another creditor whose number she'd memorized from sheer repetition. She silenced it without looking, her attention caught instead by the manila envelope wedged between the seats. The one she'd been ignoring for 3 weeks because official mail never brought good news. The return address read Caldwell Associates, estate attorneys, Camden, New Jersey, and something about the weight of it, the expensive paper stock visible through the tear in one corner, made her finally reach for it. Her fingers shook as she opened it, the dome light barely bright enough to read by. The letterhead was elegant, professional, completely out of place in a life that had shrunk to laundromats and parking lots and counting change for dollar menu items. Dear Miss Hendricks, we regret to inform you of the passing of Evelyn Margaret Caldwell, who died on September 18th at the age of 91. You have been identified as her sole surviving heir through her daughter, Catherine Caldwell Hendricks, your late mother. Upon settlement of the estate, you are entitled to inherit all remaining property and assets, including a commercial structure located at 412 Industrial Avenue, Camden, New Jersey. Claire read the letter twice, 3 times, her tired brain struggling to process words that seemed written in a foreign language. Evelyn Caldwell, her grandmother, the woman who disowned Catherine when she'd gotten pregnant at 19, who'd refused to attend Claire's birth or acknowledge her existence for 28 years, who'd built a wall of silence, so complete that Claire had only learned her name from her mother's death certificate. The letter continued with legal language about probate and estate settlement, but one paragraph made Claire's breath catch. The property in question is a former optical lens manufacturing facility, currently non-operational and in significant disrepair. Ms. Caldwell's estate has been settled, with all debts satisfied. The property transfers to you with no liens or encumbrances. Please contact our office to arrange for deed transfer and property inspection. A factory. Her grandmother had left her an abandoned factory. Claire almost laughed at the absurdity. Not money, not anything she could actually use, but a worthless industrial building probably condemned and costing more in back taxes than it would ever be worth. Still, the lawyer's card was clipped to the letter, and something about the thick paper stock, the embossed lettering, suggested this wasn't a scam. Mia stirred in the back seat, her small voice thick with sleep. "Mom, are we going home?" The question hit like a physical blow. They didn't have a home to go to. In 72 hours, their apartment would be re-rented, their belongings set on the curb. Another invisible statistic in a city full of people one paycheck away from disaster. Claire folded the letter carefully, tucked it back in an envelope, and made a decision that felt equal parts desperate and inevitable. "Yeah, baby, we're going home. Just not the one you're thinking of." Morning came too fast and too cold. Claire fed Mia the last of the granola bars from the glove compartment, split a gas station coffee between them that was more hot water than actual caffeine, and drove through rush hour traffic to the address listed on the letter. Camden unfolded around them in layers of urban decay, boarded storefronts, chain-link fences topped with razor wire, buildings that looked like they'd been hollowed out from the inside and left to rot. For 12 Industrial Avenue occupied a full city block, set back from the street behind a crumbling brick wall. The gate hung open on broken hinges, and Claire drove through slowly, the Civic suspension protesting over potholes that could swallow small cars. The factory rose before them like something from an apocalypse movie. 3 stories of red brick gone black with age and soot. Windows either broken or boarded, a faded sign barely visible through decades of grime. Caldwell Precision Optics, EST, 1947. Claire parked in what had once been a loading area, now overrun with weeds, pushing through cracked concrete. Mia pressed her face to the window, eyes wide with a child's ability to see adventure where adults only saw danger. It's huge. Is this really ours? I don't know yet, baby. Let's find out. The law office of Caldwell Associates occupied a surprisingly nice building 10 blocks away, all glass and steel that seemed deliberately placed to contrast with the industrial wasteland surrounding it. Martin Caldwell turned out to be Evelyn's nephew, a man in his 60s with silver hair and the careful manner of someone used to delivering bad news. He studied Claire across his mahogany desk, his expression unreadable. "Miss Hendricks, I'm glad you finally contacted us. I was beginning to think the letter hadn't reached you. I've been busy." The words felt inadequate to describe the chaos of her life, but Claire kept her spine straight, refusing to apologize for circumstances beyond her control. "I understand. Your grandmother's estate has been settled. Everything she owned, which wasn't much by the end, goes to you as her sole heir. The factory is yours, free and clear. No mortgage, no liens. Property taxes were paid through a trust for the next 20 years. Claire tried to process that. The factory's been closed for how long? 32 years. Evelyn shut down operations in 1992 when overseas competition made domestic manufacturing impossible. She lived in a small apartment above the main production floor until her death, refusing all offers to sell or develop the property. Martin pulled out a thick folder. "The building is structurally sound. I had it inspected last month, but it's been abandoned for decades. No electricity beyond basic service, minimal plumbing, and I'll be frank with you, Miss Hendricks, it's not worth much. The Camden real estate market is depressed, and industrial properties are particularly difficult to move. You'd be lucky to get $20,000 for it, if you can find a buyer at all." $20,000. The number hung in the air like a lifeline thrown from a sinking ship. That could be first and last month's rent, security deposit, breathing room to find a job that wouldn't collapse when Mia got sick. It could be the difference between survival and drowning. I want to see it. The inside, I mean, before I decide anything. Martin's expression shifted to something that might have been respect. "I'll take you there myself. Fair warning, it's rough. Your grandmother was eccentric toward the end. Refused help, refused visitors. When I finally convinced her to let me inside 6 months before she died, she barely seemed to recognize me." They drove to the factory in Martin's Mercedes, Mia, quiet in the back seat with her worn backpack clutched against her chest. The building looked even more ominous up close, 3 stories of abandonment pressing down with the weight of decades. Martin produced a ring of keys, each one labeled in neat script, and led them to a side entrance partially hidden behind overgrown bushes. The door opened into darkness that smelled of dust and machine oil and something else. Not decay exactly, but the peculiar scent of time standing still. Martin found a breaker box, threw a switch, and fluorescent lights flickered to life down a long corridor lined with doors, each one marked with designations that meant nothing to Claire. Grinding room, polishing station, quality control, optical laboratory. The main production floor is through here. Martin pushed through double doors, and Claire followed into a space so vast it took her breath away. The ceiling soared 30 feet high, supported by steel beams and skylights clouded with grime. Industrial machinery sat in rows like mechanical fossils. Lathes and grinders and equipment Claire couldn't begin to identify, all of it covered in decades of dust. At the far end, a metal staircase led to offices with windows overlooking the floor, and above that, barely visible in the shadows, what must be the apartment where Evelyn had lived out her final years. Mia wandered between the machines with careful steps, not touching anything, but clearly fascinated. "Mom, what do they make here?" "Magnifying glasses, lenses, optical equipment." Claire's voice echoed in the cavernous space. "Your great-grandmother built this whole business from nothing after World War II." Martin moved toward the offices, gesturing for them to follow. Evelyn was remarkable in her time. This was one of the most advanced optical facilities in the Northeast during the 50s and 60s. She held patents, supplied equipment to universities and research labs, employed over 200 people at the peak. But she was stubborn, refused to modernize or outsource manufacturing. And when the market shifted, she couldn't adapt. The business died slowly, and she died with it. The apartment above the offices had probably been comfortable once. Windows overlooking the factory floor, small kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, living area. Now it was a time capsule of declining health, scattered with medical supplies and pill bottles, furniture worn to the point of collapse. But what caught Claire's attention was the walls. They were covered in photographs. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, arranged in a chaotic collage that stretched from floor to ceiling. Manufacturing processes, workers at machines, close-ups of lenses and optical equipment, newspaper clippings about awards and innovations. And interspersed throughout, like ghosts haunting the industrial images, were personal photos. A young woman in 1940s dress holding a baby, Catherine, Claire's mother. The same woman older, standing in front of the factory, her expression fierce and proud. A teenage Catherine looking defiant in a high school photo. And then nothing. A 30-year gap where Catherine's life should have been, filled only with factory images, as if Evelyn had tried to paper over the loss with work. She never forgave my mother, did she? Claire's voice came out flat, the old grief of abandonment mixing with anger at this woman who'd chosen pride over family. Martin's silence was answer enough. Finally, he said, Evelyn lived with regret, but she didn't know how to undo what she'd done. By the time she might have reached out, Catherine had died, and she didn't think she had the right to intrude on your life. She could have tried, even once. Claire turned away from the photographs, unable to look at the evidence of a relationship she'd never been allowed to have. What I need to do to take possession? Sign papers, get the deed transferred. I have everything prepared. You can sign today if you want. The property is yours immediately upon signature. Martin hesitated. Miss Hendricks, I feel obligated to tell you. This building is going to cost you money. Even with the taxes paid, there's maintenance, insurance, utilities if you try to use it. The smart thing would be to sell as quickly as possible. Take whatever you can get and move on. Claire looked around the apartment, at the factory floor visible through grimy windows, at Mia examining a collection of magnifying glasses displayed on a shelf like trophies. The smart thing. She tried doing the smart thing her entire adult life. Practical choices, careful decisions, all of it adding up to sleeping in a car and facing eviction. Maybe it was time to try something different. How much would it cost to make the apartment livable? Basic repairs, enough that someone could actually stay here. Martin blinked, clearly not expecting that question. You're thinking of living here? You said the building's structurally sound. There's plumbing, electricity. If I could fix up this apartment, at least we have a roof over our heads while I figure out what to do with the rest of it. The neighborhood is rough, Miss Hendricks. This isn't a residential area. Neither is a laundromat parking lot. But that's where we slept last night. The words came out harder than she intended, but Claire was tired of people telling her what was reasonable when they had no idea what unreasonable actually looked like. I'm not asking for permission. I'm asking how much it would cost. Martin's expression shifted, reassessing her. Basic repairs, plumbing, electrical safety check, new windows, cleaning. Maybe $600 if you do most of the work yourself. I know a contractor who owes me a favor. He could assess it properly. $600. Claire had $47 in her wallet and $17 in a checking account that would probably be closed for inactivity within the week. But the Civic was worth maybe $800 if she could find a desperate buyer, and she'd learned to walk before, could learn again. A car was temporary. A building was permanent. Let's sign the papers. Then I want to see what needs fixing. They returned to Martin's office, and Claire signed her name on documents that transferred ownership of something she couldn't quite believe was real. The deed felt heavy in her hands, official and binding, proof that she owned something that couldn't be repossessed or evicted from. When Martin handed her the keys, the full ring, at least 20 different keys for different doors and locks throughout the building, Claire felt something shift in her chest. Not quite hope, but maybe the space where hope could grow if she could just keep moving forward. The drive back to the factory felt different with ownership settled. Claire parked the Civic in what she was already thinking of as their spot, helped Mia carry their few belongings, 2 garbage bags of clothes, a box of school supplies, the stuffed elephant Mia had since birth, up the metal stairs to the apartment. It looked even grimmer in afternoon light, but it was theirs. "Baby, I need you to be brave for a little while longer. This place needs work before it's really home, but we're going to make it work." "Okay." Mia set down her backpack and walked to the window overlooking the factory floor. Her voice came out small but steady. "As long as we're together, I don't care where we live. I just don't want to go back to the car. We're not going back. I promise." Claire pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of cheap shampoo and childhood resilience. "We're going to fix this place up, you and me. Make it ours." That night, they slept on the floor of the apartment with their coats as blankets and their bags as pillows. The building creaked and settled around them, decades of abandonment protesting the intrusion of human presence. Claire lay awake, listening to sounds she couldn't identify. Wind through broken windows somewhere below, metal expanding and contracting, the distant rumble of traffic on Industrial Avenue. Tomorrow she'd have to sell the car, find that contractor Martin mentioned, figure out how to turn $600 into basic livability. But tonight, for the first time in months, they weren't trespassing in someone else's space or waiting for security to knock on the window. They were home. It wasn't much. It wasn't even close to what most people would consider adequate, but it was a start. Mia's breathing deepened into sleep, and Claire allowed herself to close her eyes, exhaustion finally winning over anxiety. Her last thought before unconsciousness claimed her was of those photographs covering Evelyn's walls. A life measured in optical precision and isolation, genius channeled into machines instead of family. Claire wouldn't make that mistake. Whatever happened with this factory, whatever wealth or poverty waited in their future, she'd make sure Mia never felt abandoned the way Catherine had, the way Claire herself had felt for 28 years. The building settled around them with sounds like agreement, like welcome, like a space that had been waiting 3 decades for someone to claim it. And in the darkness of that vast industrial tomb, Claire Hendricks, broke, desperate, and more determined than she'd ever been, began the work of rebuilding not just a factory, but a life. Morning arrived harsh and unforgiving, November sunlight cutting through dirty windows to reveal just how rough their new home really was. Claire woke to Mia's voice, high and excited, coming from somewhere deeper in the apartment. Mom, come look at this." She found her daughter in what had been Evelyn's bedroom, standing in front of a closet door Claire hadn't opened last night. Mia pointed at something that made Claire's stomach drop. A hole in the wall behind where clothes would have hung, about 2 feet square, roughly cut through plaster and lathed to expose darkness beyond. "Is it a secret room?" Mia's eyes were wide with the kind of wonder only children could maintain when adults would see only structural damage and danger. Claire knelt down, peering into the hole with her phone's flashlight. The beam revealed not a room, but a crawl space, maybe 3 feet deep, filled with what looked like cardboard boxes wrapped in plastic sheeting. The plastic was dusty but intact, suggesting Evelyn had sealed whatever was in there deliberately, recently enough that decay hadn't set in. "Stay back, baby. I don't know if it's safe." Claire reached in carefully, pulling out the nearest box. It was surprisingly heavy, perhaps 2 feet square, wrapped multiple times in heavy-duty plastic that had been taped so thoroughly it would take deliberate effort to open. A label in Evelyn's neat handwriting read, "Production Archives, 1952 to 1967. Production Archives. Old paperwork, probably, or equipment manuals. Nothing that would help with the immediate problem of making this place livable. Still, something about the care Evelyn had taken sealing these boxes, hiding them behind a hole in the wall instead of just storing them openly, suggested they mattered. "Can we open it?" Mia's curiosity was infectious despite the morning's harsh realities. "Later. First we need to figure out water and heat, and whether this place is even safe to live in." Claire carefully pushed the box back into the crawl space and closed the closet door. Whatever Evelyn had hidden could wait. Survival couldn't. She left Mia drawing in her notebook, the girl's constant companion, filled with sketches of houses they'd driven past, dreams rendered in crayon, and walked the factory floor in full daylight. The space was even more overwhelming than last night, rows of industrial equipment stretching into shadows, dust motes floating through beams of light from skylights 30 feet overhead. Claire counted 23 grinding machines, 16 polishing stations, racks of hand tools hanging on pegboards, cabinets full of supplies that had probably been valuable once, but now just looked like junk to her untrained eye. The far corner of the main floor held something different, a section walled off with glass panels. Optical laboratory, still visible in faded gold lettering on the door. Claire tried the handle, found it locked, and sorted through the key ring until she found one that fit. The door swung open with a shriek of hinges that hadn't moved in decades. The laboratory was smaller than the main floor, but just as impressive, lined with workbenches and equipment that looked more scientific than industrial. Microscopes under protective covers, precision measuring tools in velvet-lined cases, cabinets with small drawers, each one carefully labeled in that same neat script. Precision ground lenses, focal length 50 to 100 millimeters, optical grade crystal, various cuts, rare earth compounds, restricted use. Claire opened one drawer at random and found herself looking at what appeared to be uncut gemstones, clear crystals the size of her thumb, dozens of them, each wrapped in acid-free paper. Another drawer held tiny precision-ground lenses, hundreds of them organized by size. The glass so perfectly clear it was almost invisible until light hit at certain angles. She had no idea what any of it was worth, if it was valuable at all, or just industrial remnants no one wanted. But the care with which everything was organized, the quality of the storage, suggested Evelyn hadn't just abandoned this place. She preserved it, maintaining inventory and equipment right up until she couldn't anymore. A sound from a main entrance made Claire's heart jump, the metallic scrape of the gate being pushed open, then footsteps echoing across concrete. She emerged from the laboratory to find 3 people entering the factory. A woman in her 50s wearing a business suit despite the industrial setting, and 2 men Claire recognized immediately as her cousins, though she'd never actually met them. The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You must be Claire. I'm Barbara Hendricks, your Uncle Michael's wife. These are our sons, Jason and Ryan." Claire stayed where she was, hyper-aware of Mia up in the apartment, of how isolated they were in this massive building. "How did you know I was here?" "Oh, honey, everyone in the family knows Martin transferred the property. We've been waiting to hear from you." Barbara moved deeper into the factory, her heels clicking on concrete, her gaze sweeping across the machinery with obvious calculation. "This must be so overwhelming for you. We wanted to come by and offer help." The word help landed with the same false note as her smile. Claire had learned to recognize predators during 2 years navigating shelters and social services. People who smiled while figuring out what they could take from you. Jason, the older son, maybe 30, spoke up with forced casualness. "This factory used to be worth something back in the day. Grandmother was sitting on a gold mine before she went crazy and shut it all down. Real shame what happened to the business." "Tragic," Ryan added, younger but with the same calculating eyes. "All this equipment just sitting here rusting, the building falling apart, property taxes eating away at whatever value is left." Barbara moved closer to Claire, her voice dropping to something meant to sound motherly. "You're in a tough spot, aren't you, dear? Single mother, I heard, struggling to make ends meet. This factory is just going to be a burden on you. More expense, more problems. What you need is cash, something that can actually help you and that little girl of yours." There it was, the offer, the trap. Claire felt Mia appear at the top of the metal staircase, drawn by voices, and fought to keep her own voice steady. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "We'd like to buy the factory. Take it off your hands so you can focus on getting your life together." Barbara pulled out a folded check from her purse, already filled out, and held it up just long enough for Claire to see the amount. $600. "Cash in hand today. You sign over the deed and walk away with real money instead of a crumbling building you can't possibly maintain." $600. The exact amount she needed for repairs. The exact amount that wouldn't be enough to do anything except put her right back where she started, homeless, desperate, searching for a miracle that wouldn't come twice. Claire looked at the check, then at her cousins, then at Barbara's practiced smile, and felt something crystallize in her chest. No. Barbara's smile tightened. Don't be foolish, Claire. This is a generous offer for a property that's frankly worthless. The building needs hundreds of thousands in repairs. The equipment is obsolete. The neighborhood is terrible. You'd be lucky to find any buyer at all. Then why do you want it so badly? The question hung in the space between them. Jason stepped forward, his voice harder now. Grandmother owed us. Our father, your Uncle Michael, worked in this factory for 15 years before she fired him for trying to modernize operations. She cut him out of her life, just like she cut out your mother. This property should have been divided among all her descendants, not just given to someone who never even knew her. She left it to me, not you. Deal with it. Claire moved toward the door, making it clear the conversation was over. Now, get out of my factory. Ryan's laugh held no humor. Your factory? You don't even know what you have here. You're going to lose it within 6 months, property taxes, utilities, repairs you can't afford. And when you're desperate enough, when you've got nowhere else to turn, we'll still be here. But our offer won't be $600 anymore. It'll be $2. They left with the dramatic certainty of people used to getting what they wanted eventually. Claire watched until their BMW disappeared down Industrial Avenue, then climbed the stairs to find Mia pressed against the apartment window, worry etched across her young face. Are they going to take our house? No, baby. This is ours. Nobody's taking it. The words came out fierce, a promise Claire wasn't sure she could keep, but would die trying. The contractor Martin recommended arrived that afternoon, a man in his 60s named Frank Kozlowski who'd apparently done work for Evelyn decades ago. He walked through the apartment with a professional eye, testing faucets, checking electrical outlets, examining the structural elements with the kind of attention that suggested he actually cared about getting it right. Water's shut off to this section, but the main lines are good. Electrical's outdated, but safe enough if we replace the breaker box. Windows are shot. You'll need all new ones or bore them up for winter. Heating. He trailed off, examining the ancient radiator system. This won't work without the factory boiler running, and that's not happening anytime soon. You'll need space heaters, which means upgrading the electrical to handle the load. Claire did math in her head that didn't work no matter how she arranged it. How much? Frank pulled out a battered notebook and started writing. Materials, labor, bare minimum to make this livable through winter, call it $600, and that's with me doing most of it as a favor to Martin. But Miss Hendricks, I have to tell you, this is just a Band-Aid. This building needs real money to be properly functional. I've got $600. Let's make it work. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I'll start tomorrow. Bring a crew, get the essentials done in a week if the weather holds. After Frank left, Claire sat at the rickety table in the apartment's kitchen area and opened her laptop. Purchased used 3 years ago and clinging to life through sheer stubbornness. A dozen job applications sent last week, all dead ends. Her bank account showing $17.43. The Civic outside worth maybe $800 if she could find a buyer fast enough. Mia appeared at her elbow with the quiet way she had of materializing when Claire's stress reached critical levels. Mom, can I show you something? She led Claire to the apartment's small bathroom, where a window looked down on a section of the factory floor Claire hadn't explored yet. Mia pointed to something Claire had dismissed as more junk, wooden crates stacked against the far wall, dozens of them, each one stamped with Caldwell precision optics and dates ranging from the 1950s to the 1980s. I was looking with your binoculars. Mia held up the cheap pair Claire had bought at a thrift store years ago. Some of those boxes have words on them, like prototype and custom orders and government contract, property of U.S. Navy. Claire felt something shift in her awareness. Government contracts, custom work, the kind of specialized manufacturing that might have involved. What? She had no idea. But whatever Evelyn had been making in that laboratory, whatever precision optical equipment had required rare earth compounds and optical-grade crystal, it hadn't been simple magnifying glasses. Good eye, baby. Claire hugged her daughter, this observant, clever girl who saw details adults missed. Let's go take a closer look. They descended to the main floor as afternoon light slanted through through dirty skylights. The crates stood 8 feet high in places, organized with the same meticulous care that seemed to characterize everything Evelyn had done. Claire started at the oldest dates, using a crowbar from the tool rack to pry open a box-marked prototype development, 1952. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were lenses, but not the simple magnifying glasses Claire had imagined. These were complex multi-element assemblies, precision ground, and assembled into brass housings. Each one had a tag with specifications Claire didn't understand: focal ratios, wavelength ranges, applications listed as astronomical observation and submarine periscopes and aerial reconnaissance. Another crate held optical prisms, each one cut from crystal, so perfect Claire could see her reflection undistorted in surfaces ground to tolerances she couldn't even measure. The tags referenced buyers she recognized: Kodak, Bosch and Lohm, NASA precursor organizations. Premium work sold to premium clients, the kind of specialized manufacturing that disappeared when overseas competitors couldn't match the quality but could massively undercut the price. Mia pulled out something that made them both stop: a wooden case about the size of shoebox, carved with intricate patterns and lined with velvet. Inside sat 3 lenses unlike anything else they'd found, each one mounted in gold instead of brass. The glass, tinted with colors Claire had never seen in optical equipment. The tag read, "Custom Commission, Sheikh Abdullah bin Rashid, 1966. Payment in full, property of client, never collected." Mom, why didn't he come get them? Good question. Claire photographed the lenses, the case, the tag, and carefully closed it back up. She opened 5 more crates before darkness forced them to stop, each one revealing similar stories. Custom work completed, payment received, clients who'd never collected their orders. Government contracts fulfilled, but never picked up. Prototype designs developed, but never put into production. It was like Evelyn had built a time capsule of mid-century American manufacturing, preserving not just the equipment and materials, but the actual products she'd created. And she'd left it all here, organized and protected, as if she'd known someone would eventually come looking. That night, Claire sold the Civic to a mechanic 3 blocks away for $750 cash. More than she'd expected, less than she needed, but enough when combined with what was left from before. She walked back to the factory through darkening streets, hyper-aware of her vulnerability, and found Mia had lit every working light in the apartment, turning it into a beacon visible from blocks away. "I thought you might need to see it from far away," her daughter explained, "so you'd know where home was." Claire pulled her into a hug that threatened to crack her carefully maintained composure. This 8-year-old who'd been sleeping in cars and eating dollar menu items, who'd learned to navigate homelessness with resilience that broke her mother's heart, now making sure Claire could find her way home. The next morning, Frank arrived with 2 other workers and materials loaded in a truck that had seen better decades. They descended on the apartment with professional efficiency, replacing windows, upgrading electrical, fixing plumbing, installing space heaters that would keep them alive through New Jersey winter. Claire helped where she could, learning as she went, while Mia worked on schoolwork at the kitchen table under Barbara's strict supervision. By the 3rd day, Claire had been awake 30 hours straight, existing on gas station coffee and granola bars, when Frank pulled her aside with an expression she couldn't read. "I've been working buildings in Camden 40 years. Seen a lot of factories come and go. This place," he gestured at the machinery surrounding them, "this wasn't just a factory. Your grandmother was operating at a level most manufacturers never reached. That equipment out there, some of it's still state-of-the-art. The optical laboratory, especially, I looked at it closer this morning. That's research-grade equipment, not industrial. The kind of precision tools universities use. Still use if they could afford them. What are you saying?" "I'm saying whatever your grandmother left you, it's worth more than the building. Maybe significantly more." Frank handed her a business card. "Friend of mine deals in used industrial equipment, specializes in optical manufacturing. You should give him a call. At minimum, he can tell you what you're sitting on." The card read, "David Chun, Industrial Assets Specialist. Precision Equipment, our focus." Claire tucked it in her pocket and went back to work, but something had shifted. Barbara's aggressive offer of $600, Ryan's certainty that she'd be desperate within months. The way they'd looked at the machinery with calculations visible behind their eyes. None of it had been about helping her. They'd known something she didn't. Maybe still didn't. But she was learning. Frank's crew finished the apartment repairs on day 6, transforming it from uninhabitable ruin to something that could charitably be called basic shelter. The windows no longer leaked cold air. The plumbing worked without spraying water across the bathroom, and the space heaters generated enough warmth that Claire and Mia could sleep without their coats. It wasn't comfortable, not by any conventional measure, but it was theirs, and it was warm, and nobody could take it away with 72 hours' notice. The morning after Frank left, Claire stood in the apartment doorway with David Chin's business card in her hand, debating whether making the call would open doors she couldn't close. Mia had already left for school. The bus stop was a 15-minute walk, manageable now that winter hadn't fully arrived, and the principal had been surprisingly understanding about their unconventional living situation when Claire had explained they were renovating family property. She dialed before she could talk herself out of it. David Chun answered on the second ring with the brisk efficiency of someone used to evaluating opportunities quickly. David Chun. Mr. Chun, my name is Claire Hendricks. Frank Kozlowski gave me your card. I inherited an optical manufacturing facility, and he suggested you might be able to tell me what the equipment is worth. A pause. Optical manufacturing. What kind of optical work? Precision lenses, prisms, custom commissions for government and commercial clients. The factory closed in 1992, but everything's still here. All the machinery, inventory, production archives. Another pause, longer this time. Did you say the factory closed in 92 and everything's still there? My grandmother locked the doors and never liquidated anything. It's been sitting untouched for 32 years. What was the company name? Caldwell Precision Optics. The silence that followed lasted long enough that Claire thought the connection had dropped. Then David's voice came back, no longer brisk, but careful, almost reverent. Caldwell Precision Optics. Evelyn Caldwell's company. You knew her. I knew of her. Miss Hendricks, your grandmother was a legend in optical manufacturing. One of maybe 5 people in the country who could hand-grind aspheric lenses to tolerances that machines still can't match. She supplied work to NASA, the Department of Defense, major research universities. When she shut down, there were people in the industry who acted like a library had burned down. That level of craftsmanship just disappeared. Claire's hand tightened on the phone. If she was that important, why did the business fail? Because she refused to compromise. Overseas manufacturers could produce adequate optics for 1/10 of the cost. Evelyn only knew how to make perfect optics, and perfection became a luxury market too small to sustain the operation. But Miss Hendricks, if the equipment is intact, if the inventory is preserved. He trailed off. I need to see it. Today, if possible. They agreed on 2 o'clock. Claire spent the intervening hours walking the factory floor with new eyes, seeing not just dust-covered machinery, but legacy. She opened more crates from the 1960s and 70s, each one revealing precision work that looked more like art than manufacturing. Telescope objectives ground to exact specifications, microscope components. Assembled with tolerances measured in wavelengths of light, custom prisms cut from optical crystal so pure it looked like frozen air. One crate held something different, a leather-bound journal with production log, restricted projects embossed on the cover. Claire opened it carefully, the pages stiff with age but perfectly preserved, and found herself reading Evelyn's meticulous documentation of classified work. Periscope assemblies for nuclear submarines. Reconnaissance optics for spy satellites. Targeting systems for guided missiles. Each entry noted the client, specifications, payment received, and delivery confirmation. Except some entries had a different notation. Payment received, delivery refused. Item retained per contract clause 7. Claire flipped through pages chronicling this pattern. Projects completed to specification, payment accepted, but the actual hardware never delivered because clients had gone bankrupt, contracts had been canceled, or political situations had shifted. Evelyn had kept everything organized and preserved, following legal requirements that work paid for became property of the client, even if never collected. And there were dozens of these entries, maybe hundreds. 30 years of specialized manufacturing retained because circumstances prevented delivery, each item representing significant value that had simply accumulated. David Chun arrived at exactly 2 o'clock in a silver Lexus that looked out of place against the industrial decay of the neighborhood. He was younger than Claire expected, maybe 45, with the precise manner of someone who'd spent a career evaluating things most people never thought about. His handshake was firm, his gaze already cataloging visible equipment before she'd even finished introducing herself. "Thank you for seeing me, Miss Hendricks. Before we start, I need to be clear about my role. I broker sales of industrial equipment, which means I charge commission on successful transactions. I have no interest in undervaluing what you have or pressuring you to sell before you're ready. My reputation depends on fair dealing." The directness was refreshing after Barbara's calculated manipulation. Claire led him onto the factory floor and watched his expression shift from professional interest to something approaching awe as he moved between machines, running hands over equipment with the careful attention of someone who understood exactly what he was seeing. This is a Zeiss universal grinding machine from 1955. There are maybe 10 of these left in the country, and most are in museums. He moved to the next row. This is a Jones and Lamson optical comparator. That's a Rupp optical dividing head. Miss Hendricks, this isn't just old equipment. This is the complete tool chain for precision optical manufacturing from the golden age of American industry. Intact and apparently maintained. He spent 20 minutes examining machinery before Claire showed him the optical laboratory. The moment he saw the equipment under protective covers, his professional composure cracked. Is that a Lates photometer? And a Zeiss interference comparator? He moved toward the cabinets with their organized drawers. "May I?" Claire handed him the keys. David opened drawers at random, examining contents with increasing disbelief. Precision lenses organized by specification. Optical-grade crystal in various cuts. Rare earth compounds carefully sealed. He picked up one of the clear crystals Claire had noticed days ago, held it to the light, and his hand started shaking. "Miss Hendricks, do you know what this is? Some kind of optical crystal?" "This is synthetic sapphire. Industrial grade, maybe 4 carats. And there are..." He pulled open another drawer, then another, his voice climbing. "There are hundreds of them. Thousands probably. Your grandmother was stockpiling optical-grade materials at a time when they were relatively cheap. Now, they're essential for laser systems, semiconductor manufacturing, precision optics. This drawer alone is worth 6 figures. 6 figures. The words didn't compute. Claire had been calculating survival in hundreds of dollars, and David was talking about a drawer full of crystals worth more than most houses. She leaned against the workbench, suddenly dizzy. "The crystals are valuable. Extremely. But Miss Hendricks, the crystals are just the beginning." David moved through the laboratory with mounting excitement, opening cabinets and examining inventory with the fervor of an archaeologist discovering an intact tomb. These precision lenses, they're not just old inventory. They're custom work completed to specifications that would cost $50,000 each to reproduce today. This compound, he gestured at a cabinet of sealed containers. "This is lanthanum fluoride. It's essential for extreme ultraviolet lithography, the kind used in advanced semiconductor manufacturing. Your grandmother was using it for precision optics in the 70s. Now it's almost impossible to source because of export restrictions. She's sitting on a strategic material that major tech companies would pay premium prices for." Claire's mind raced through implications she couldn't quite grasp. "How much are we talking about?" "The laboratory inventory, I mean." David pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the calculator app. "Conservative estimate, just what I've seen in this room so far. $2 to $3 million. Maybe more if the quality is consistent throughout. 2 million. 3 million. The numbers were so far beyond Claire's reality, they felt fictional. She'd been thrilled to inherit $600 worth of repair money, and David was telling her the contents of a single room could buy houses, could provide security, could change everything. "There's more." Her voice came out hoarse. Crates of finished products, custom commissions that were never collected, government contracts that were completed but never delivered. 30 years of accumulation. David's expression went very still. Show me. They spent 3 hours opening crates while David photographed, documented, and made notes that grew increasingly detailed. Each box revealed new treasures, telescope objectives commissioned by observatories that had gone bankrupt, microscope assemblies ordered by research labs that had closed, submarine periscope components built for Navy contracts that had been canceled during defense budget cuts. All of it completed, paid for, and retained per contract clauses that required finished work to remain client property until legally disposed of. The gold-mounted lenses Mia had found turned out to be commissioned for a Saudi prince's personal observatory. Payment had cleared, but political instability had prevented delivery. David handled them with gloves he'd pulled from his car, his voice shaking as he explained what Claire was looking at. These are apochromatic telescope objectives ground by hand to eliminate chromatic aberration. Your grandmother used specialized glass formulations and grinding techniques that produced results modern manufacturing struggles to match. The gold mounting alone is worth $20,000. The optics are probably worth 10 times that to the right collector. How much? Claire needed him to say a number, needed something concrete to hold on to. David consulted his notes, did calculations that seemed to take forever, and finally looked up with an expression that mixed awe and disbelief. Miss Hendricks, based on what I've documented today, you're looking at minimum $40 to $50 million in optical equipment, materials, and inventory. If we can properly authenticate the provenance, if the quality is consistent across all the undocumented crates, if the specialized materials are properly preserved, you could be sitting on something approaching $100 million. The words hit like a physical impact. Claire's vision tunneled, sounds becoming distant and unclear. She was aware of David's hand on her elbow, guiding her to sit on one of the wooden crates before she fell. $100 million. She'd inherited an abandoned factory to avoid sleeping in a car, and it contained enough wealth to never worry about money again, to provide for Mia, to build something that mattered. Are you certain? The question came out barely above a whisper. I'll need to do complete inventory, get expert authentication on the rare pieces, establish market values for specialized items. But yes, Miss Hendricks, I'm certain this is worth significant money. Your grandmother didn't just close a factory. She sealed away a fortune. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of documentation and discovery. David returned with specialists, an optical physicist from Princeton who authenticated the precision lenses, a materials scientist who verified the rare earth compounds, a military historian who confirmed the government contract work. Each expert arrived skeptical and left astonished, adding their own estimates to David's growing assessment of value. Claire barely slept, splitting time between the factory and Mia's school routine, trying to maintain normalcy while her understanding of their situation completely transformed. She called Martin Caldwell to verify the legal status of the inherited property and its contents. Yes, everything in the factory belonged to her. No restrictions, no claims from clients whose payments had cleared decades ago. Under salvage and abandoned property law, items retained for more than 20 years became assets of the property owner. Martin's voice had carried the careful neutrality of an attorney who understood exactly what this meant. Claire, you need proper legal representation. Estate law is one thing, but you're looking at asset management, intellectual property questions, potential tax implications. I can refer you to specialists in Philadelphia who handle high-net-worth clients. High-net-worth clients. Claire had a laugh at the absurdity. She'd been homeless a month ago, and now attorneys were discussing wealth management strategies. On the 4th day after David's initial visit, Barbara Hendricks returned with her sons and an attorney whose expensive suit and briefcase telegraphed serious intent. Claire met them at the factory entrance, no longer intimidated. Her understanding of the situation completely shifted. Barbara's smile was sharper this time, calculation more visible. Claire, we need to talk about your inheritance. It's come to our attention that you've had outside parties evaluating the property. We think you're being taken advantage of. By who? by brokers and consultants who see a desperate woman and think they can convince you this junk is valuable. Jason stepped forward, his voice carrying false concern. We've had the factory appraised by our own expert. The equipment is obsolete. The inventory is worthless. You're being fed a fantasy. Claire crossed her arms, keeping her voice level. Your expert. Who would that be? The attorney spoke up. Richard Morrison, licensed industrial appraiser with 30 years' experience. He's assessed the visible equipment at approximately $80,000 scrap value. Given the building's condition and the neighborhood, fair market value for the entire property is perhaps $250,000. We're prepared to offer you $300,000 cash today, above market value, to resolve this cleanly. $300,000. 2 weeks ago, the number would have seemed like salvation. Now, knowing what David and his team had documented, it was insulting. More than insulting. It was proof Barbara and her family knew exactly what the factory contained and were hoping Claire's ignorance would let them steal it. No. Barbara's mask cracked completely. Don't be stupid, Claire. You're in over your head. This factory requires expertise you don't have, connections you'll never make. We're family. Let us handle this properly. Family. Claire let the word hang between them, bitter and sharp. Where was family when I was living in my car? Where was family when Mia and I were eating from dollar menus and sleeping in laundromat parking lots? You didn't give a damn about us until you realized this property was valuable. Now you're here with fake appraisals and predatory offers, hoping I'm desperate enough to believe you're helping me. Ryan's face flushed red. Grandmother was senile at the end. That could be contested. She wasn't competent to make decisions about property distribution. She was competent enough to seal away a fortune you didn't know existed. Competent enough to preserve 30 years of inventory and equipment worth more than your fake appraiser's entire career. Competent enough to leave it to someone she believed deserved it rather than family who would just liquidate it for fast cash. The attorney tried to interject. Miss Hendricks, you're making serious accusations. I'm stating facts. Your client offered me $600 for property worth tens of millions. Then $300,000 when I wouldn't take the lowball. That's fraud, counselor. Attempted theft through deception. Martin Caldwell has everything documented, including your initial visit. Now get off my property before I call the police and explain how you're harassing a woman who's done nothing except inherit what was legally left to her. They left with threats about legal challenges and competency hearings, about dragging Claire through courts until she'd spend more fighting them than the property was worth. But their bluster rang hollow now that Claire understood what she actually had. This wasn't a crumbling factory with scrap value. This was a legacy worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth proving that Evelyn had chosen correctly when she'd selected a granddaughter she'd never met over family who'd only ever seen assets to strip. That evening, Mia came home from school to find Claire sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by David's documentation. Photographs of lenses worth hundreds of thousands, inventories of rare materials, provenance records for custom commissions. The girl dropped her backpack and climbed into her mother's lap with the casual physicality of childhood, studying the papers with solemn attention. Are we rich now? The question deserved honesty. We own something valuable, baby, very valuable. But turning that into money we can actually use takes time. We have to authenticate everything, find buyers, handle legal issues. It's complicated, but we get to keep the factory? Yes, we definitely keep the factory. Mia nodded, satisfied, and pulled out her notebook to show Claire the drawing she'd made during art class. The factory rendered in careful crayon lines, windows blazing with light, two stick figures holding hands in front of the entrance. She'd titled it Our Home, in block letters across the top, and Claire felt tears threatening for the 1,000th time that week. Her daughter had drawn them a permanent home, and against all odds, impossibly, that's exactly what they had. David's full inventory and authentication took 6 weeks of meticulous documentation. His team cataloged every machine, every crate of inventory, every drawer in the optical laboratory. Specialists examined Evelyn's production logs and cross-referenced them with historical records, confirming that completed government contracts really had been retained per legal requirements. that custom commissions had indeed been paid for, but never collected, that this wasn't just valuable inventory, but legally clean assets that could be sold without complication. The final report landed in Claire's inbox on a December morning when snow had started falling outside the factory windows. She opened it with Mia reading over her shoulder, both of them holding their breath as numbers resolved on screen. Total authenticated value, $470 million. Claire read the number 3 times, her brain refusing to accept it. Not 40, not 100. $470 million in optical equipment, precision lenses, rare earth materials, and completed custom work that represented the absolute peak of mid-century American manufacturing. David's cover note explained, the specialized materials alone, sapphire crystals, lanthanum fluoride, optical-grade germanium, are worth $180 million at current market prices. The precision lenses and custom optics add another $220 million. The manufacturing equipment, if sold to specialty shops and optical researchers, represents $70 million. Conservative estimate, everything documented and authenticated, $470 million represents achievable sale value over a structured disposition timeline. $470 million. Claire's hand shook as she scrolled through the detailed breakdowns. Individual items worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. A collection of submarine periscope assemblies valued at $15 million. Satellite reconnaissance optics worth $30 million. Research-grade microscope components that universities and labs would pay premium prices for, another $40 million. And throughout it all, Evelyn's meticulous documentation proving ownership, payment, and legal right to sell. Mom, Mia's voice was small, uncertain. Is that a lot? Claire pulled her daughter close, laughing and crying simultaneously. Yeah, baby, that's a lot. That's enough to never worry about money again. Enough to make sure you go to any college you want. Enough to help other people who are struggling like we were. Enough to change everything. She called Martin Caldwell, who connected her with the Philadelphia attorneys he'd mentioned. They arrived the next day, 3 lawyers specializing in estate management, tax planning, and asset disposition for high-net-worth clients. They reviewed David's authentication, examined Evelyn's documentation, and confirmed what Claire could barely let herself believe. This was real, legal, and hers. Miss Hendricks, the lead attorney explained, you're in a unique position. These assets are highly valuable, but also specialized. Liquidating everything immediately would flood the market and reduce prices. We recommend a structured sale approach. Auction the most valuable pieces, broker private sales for strategic materials, establish relationships with research institutions for ongoing supply of components. Done properly, you'll maximize value while maintaining market stability. They outline plans for trust that would protect assets, investment strategies that would generate sustainable income, tax approaches that would minimize obligations while ensuring legal compliance. Claire signed papers that made her head spin, established accounts that would hold money she couldn't quite comprehend, and tried to wrap her mind around the fact that poverty, which had defined her entire adult life, was simply over. That evening, she and Mia ate dinner from the Chinese restaurant 3 blocks away. 1-ton soup and lo mein and egg rolls, a feast after years of dollar menus. They sat at the kitchen table in their factory apartment, snow falling outside windows that no longer leaked cold air, and Claire told her daughter what happened next. We're going to be okay, Mia. Really okay, not just surviving. We can get a nicer place if you want, or we can stay here and fix this building up properly. We can travel, see things you've only read about in school. We can help people who are struggling the way we were, shelters, food banks, programs that actually support families instead of just processing them through systems that don't care. Mia considered this seriously, her young face thoughtful. Can we stay in the factory? At least for a while? I like it here. It feels like great-grandma Evelyn is still watching out for us. Claire felt her throat tighten. This child who'd never had a permanent home wanted to stay in an apartment above an abandoned factory because it felt safe, because it connected them to family Claire had never known, but who'd somehow seen them and chosen them anyway. Yeah, baby, we can stay. We'll fix it up, proper heating, nice furniture, make it actually comfortable. But if you want to live here, we'll live here. They finished dinner while snow accumulated outside, transforming the industrial neighborhood into something almost beautiful. Claire's phone buzzed with messages. David confirming auction dates for the first round of sales, Martin verifying trust documents, the Philadelphia attorneys requesting signatures on additional paperwork. Each notification represented her new reality, the impossible transformation from homeless to wealthy, from desperate to secure. But underneath the relief, underneath the gratitude and disbelief, Claire felt something else. Anger. Anger at Barbara and Jason and Ryan, who'd tried to steal this from her, who'd offered $600 for nearly $500 million in assets, who'd counted on her ignorance and desperation to let them commit fraud. They'd known what the factory contained, or at least suspected, and they'd gambled that Claire wouldn't figure it out before signing over the deed. They'd gambled wrong. The next morning, Claire called a press conference. The attorneys had advised against it, preferring discretion in high-value transactions. But Claire had learned something during 2 years of homelessness. Invisibility was dangerous, silence was complicity, and sometimes the best protection was making sure everyone was watching. The Camden Courier sent a reporter. So did the Philadelphia Inquirer. Local TV news arrived with cameras and questions about the abandoned factory that had become news. Claire stood on the factory floor, surrounded by machinery worth millions, Mia at her side, and told the truth. 6 weeks ago, I was homeless. My daughter and I were sleeping in our car, facing eviction, with $47 to our names. I inherited this factory from a grandmother I never knew, and family members offered me $600 for it, claiming it was worthless. They lied. She held up David's authentication report, the cover page showing that $470 million figure. This factory contains one of the most complete collections of precision optical equipment and materials in the country. My grandmother, Evelyn Caldwell, was a pioneer in optical manufacturing who built this business from nothing and preserved 30 years of accumulated work. She left it to me, not to family who would have liquidated it, but to someone she believed would honor what she'd built. The cameras focused on the machinery behind her, on the obvious value David's team had documented. Claire continued, her voice steady despite knowing she was burning bridges that could never be rebuilt. To the family members who tried to cheat me, you failed. To anyone else who thinks a desperate woman is easy prey, you're wrong. And to other people struggling the way I was, she looked directly at the cameras, speaking to women living in cars and shelters and situations that ground them down daily. Sometimes impossible things happen. Sometimes someone you never knew sees you and decides you deserve better. Don't let anyone steal that from you. Fight for what's yours. The story went viral within hours. Regional news became national interest as reporters discovered the human drama beneath the financial details. Homeless mother inherits fortune. Family members attempt fraud. Woman fights back and wins. Claire's phone exploded with interview requests, book deals, Hollywood agents asking about movie rights. She ignored most of it, focusing instead on the structured sales David had arranged. The first auction happened at Christie's in New York 3 weeks later. Premium optical equipment and precision lenses sold to universities, research institutions, private collectors. Claire and Mia attended, watching from a private box as items sold for prices that seemed fictional. A set of telescope objectives went for $800,000. Custom microscope assemblies brought $1.2 million. The submarine periscope optics sold to a maritime museum for $3.5 million. By the end of the evening, 18 items had generated $22 million in verified sales. David projected another 15 auctions over the next 2 years to properly liquidate high-value pieces without flooding markets, each one bringing millions more. But the real money came from the materials. Semiconductor manufacturers desperate for lanthanum fluoride paid premium prices for Evelyn's carefully preserved stockpile. Laser companies competed for optical-grade sapphire crystals. Defense contractors quietly purchased specialized compounds for applications Claire wasn't allowed to know about. The materials sales alone brought $180 million in the first year, with ongoing contracts for remaining inventory. The transformation didn't happen overnight, despite what news coverage suggested. 6 months after the first Christie's auction, Claire still woke up some mornings convinced she was back in a Honda Civic, that the factory and the fortune had been an elaborate dream her exhausted mind had constructed to escape reality. Then she'd open her eyes to the renovated apartment. Professional renovation this time, with heated floors and custom windows and furniture that hadn't been salvaged from street corners, and the truth would settle over her again like a weight she was still learning to carry. Wealth, Claire discovered, came with its own particular form of poverty. She had money beyond anything she'd imagined, but she'd lost the invisibility that had protected her during homelessness. People recognized her now, stopped her on the street with opinions about how she should spend, invest, or donate. Financial advisors appeared from nowhere with can't-miss opportunities. Distant relatives emerged, claiming relationships that had never existed when she'd needed help. The same social workers who'd processed her paperwork with mechanical indifference now called her an inspiration, conveniently forgetting how close they'd come to separating her from Mia. But worst were the people who looked at her with resentment, who believed that wealth should be earned rather than inherited, who saw her story not as justice, but as lottery luck that could have happened to anyone. They dismissed the 2 years of struggle, the nights sleeping in parking lots, the constant fear and humiliation. They saw only the ending. Homeless woman becomes millionaire, and decided it was unfair. Claire learned to ignore most of it. What mattered was Mia, thriving in ways that made Claire's chest ache with gratitude. The girl had her own bedroom now, properly furnished with a bed that wasn't the back seat of a car and a desk where she did homework surrounded by books they could actually afford to buy. She attended a private school in downtown Philadelphia where teachers recognized her intelligence instead of pitying her circumstances, where other children didn't whisper about the smell of Laundromat soap or worn-out shoes. But Mia had also insisted they keep the factory, keep living in the apartment above the production floor, because she said it felt like family. So Claire had compromised, professional renovation that made the space genuinely comfortable while preserving the industrial character Mia loved. The main factory floor became a combination museum and working space. Some equipment donated to universities and technical schools. Other pieces maintained in operational condition by craftsmen who trained under Evelyn decades ago and returned when they heard Claire was preserving the legacy. It was one of these craftsmen, a man named Robert Shun, David's uncle, as it turned out, who told Claire the story she'd been missing. He arrived on a March morning 8 months after the inheritance, 76 years old with hands scarred from 6 decades of precision grinding, and asked if he could show her something. "I worked for Evelyn from 1968 to 1985, Robert explained as they walked the factory floor. "Started as an apprentice when I was 18, stayed until she couldn't afford to keep paying staff. She taught me everything about optical grinding, but she also taught me something more important, that quality mattered more than profit, that some work was worth doing even if it didn't make business sense." He stopped in front of the optical laboratory, now restored to gleaming functionality. "Your grandmother was brilliant, Miss Claire, truly brilliant. But she was also stubborn and proud. She refused to compromise on quality, even when it meant losing contracts to cheaper competitors. She fired her own son when he suggested cost-cutting measures that would have saved the business. She cut off your mother when Catherine got pregnant because Evelyn believed it represented a failure of planning and discipline." Claire had heard versions of this story from Martin, but Robert's telling carried weight that legal summaries couldn't match. In 1990, everything started collapsing. The Berlin Wall came down, defense budgets got slashed, all those government contracts dried up. Commercial clients were buying from overseas manufacturers. Evelyn was 68, still working 16-hour days, trying to keep the business alive, but it wasn't enough. Robert's voice softened. "I was there the day she decided to close. She stood right here in the laboratory and said, 'I've built something beautiful, and I'm not going to destroy it by letting it become mediocre. Better to seal it away and hope someone worthy finds it someday.'" She meant the equipment, Claire said quietly. The inventory. She meant the work itself. The craftsmanship. The dedication to excellence. Robert touched one of the precision grinding machines with obvious affection. Evelyn spent the next 2 years organizing everything, documenting every piece, sealing away 30 years of accumulated work. She paid off all debts, established the trust to cover property taxes, and then she just waited, living alone in that apartment, watching over everything like a guardian. Why didn't she reach out to me, to my mother, even after Catherine died? Robert's expression carried old pain. Because she convinced herself she didn't deserve forgiveness. Your grandmother believed in consequences in living with your choices. She cut off Catherine, and Catherine died before they could reconcile. Evelyn thought approaching you would be selfish, inserting herself into your life when she'd refused to be part of it before. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She built something valuable and left it to you, hoping you'd understand it was an apology she couldn't speak out loud. The words settled into Claire with the weight of truth. Evelyn hadn't been cruel, just damaged in ways that made connection impossible. She'd channeled love into precision optics and sealed fortunes, into documentation and preservation, into a gift that said everything she couldn't. She watched you, Robert added. After Catherine died, she hired investigators to track where you were, how you were doing. She knew about the domestic violence, the shelters, the homelessness. It killed her that she couldn't help, that her pride and guilt had built walls too high to climb. The only way she could show she cared was through what she was good at, building something perfect and hoping you'd be strong enough to claim it. Claire felt tears threatening and blinked them back. I wish I'd known her. She knew you, Miss Claire. That's what mattered to her. She saw how you fought for Mia, how you kept going when most people would have collapsed. She said once, near the end, that you had her stubbornness but Catherine's heart, that maybe you could do what she never managed, be strong without being alone. Robert smiled, sad and proud simultaneously. She was right. The legal battle with Barbara and her family came to a head in July, 14 months after Claire had inherited. They filed suit claiming Evelyn had been incompetent, that the will was invalid, that the estate should be divided among all descendants. Their attorney presented medical records showing Evelyn had been prescribed medication for anxiety and mild cognitive decline, arguing this proved she wasn't capable of making sound decisions about property distribution. Claire's legal team, the Philadelphia attorneys who'd taken her case pro bono after the story went viral, recognizing both the publicity value and the genuine injustice, demolished the claim methodically. They presented Robert's testimony about Evelyn's mental acuity right up until her death. They showed the meticulous documentation of the factory's contents, the careful legal arrangements for the estate, the specific instructions Evelyn had left about her wishes. They brought in Martin Caldwell, who testified that Evelyn had been completely lucid when updating her will, that she'd explained in detail why she was leaving everything to Claire rather than other family members. But the most damaging evidence came from Claire herself. Her attorneys had subpoenaed Barbara's financial records, discovering that she'd taken out a $200,000 loan using her house as collateral, borrowed money intended to buy the factory before Claire understood its value. When that failed, Barbara had hired the fake appraiser to provide lowball valuations, then planned to flip the property immediately for massive profit. The scheme was documented in emails Barbara's attorney was legally required to produce, and they destroyed any remaining credibility her case might have had. Judge Michelle Rodriguez took exactly 10 minutes to rule after closing arguments. She removed her reading glasses and looked at Barbara with an expression that could have frozen water. I've presided over estate disputes for 23 years, and this is among the most egregious attempts at fraud I've encountered. The evidence is overwhelming that Evelyn Caldwell was completely competent when creating her will, that she had valid reasons for her distribution choices, and that the petitioners are motivated purely by greed rather than genuine concern about proper estate administration. She leaned forward, voice hardening. Mrs. Hendricks, you offered your niece, a homeless single mother, $600 for property you knew was worth millions. You hired a fraudulent appraiser to provide false valuations. You've harassed Miss Hendricks, made false claims about her competency, and attempted to use the legal system to steal what doesn't belong to you. Your conduct is reprehensible. Barbara started to speak, but Judge Rodriguez cut her off. The petition is denied. Furthermore, I'm ordering petitioners to pay all legal fees incurred by Claire Hendricks in defending this frivolous suit. I'm also referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of possible fraud charges. Get out of my courtroom. Barbara left in tears, her son silent and pale behind her. Claire watched them go and felt not triumph, but something sadder. Pity for people so consumed by what they didn't have that they destroyed any chance of having anything real. They traded family for money they'd never get, and the exchange had left them bankrupt in ways that mattered more than finances. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed with questions Claire had learned to deflect. Yes, she was relieved. Yes, she hoped her cousins would reflect on their choices. No, she wasn't interested in reconciliation with people who'd try to steal from her. The attorneys handled most of it, their professional polish providing buffer between Claire and the feeding frenzy of public interest. But one reporter, a young woman from a nonprofit news organization focused on poverty issues, asked a question that cut through the noise. Miss Hendricks, now that this is settled, what are you going to do with the money? Claire had been thinking about this for months, planning with the kind of meticulous attention Evelyn would have recognized. I'm establishing the Evelyn Caldwell Foundation for single mothers and their children. We'll provide emergency housing, legal assistance, job training, childcare support, all the things I needed and couldn't find when I was desperate. Because I got lucky, impossibly lucky, but luck shouldn't be the only thing standing between mothers and homelessness. The foundation launched 6 months later in a renovated warehouse 3 blocks from the factory. Claire had purchased the building with cash, hired staff who'd actually worked in shelters and understood what help looked like versus what performative charity looked like, and created programs based on what she needed during those brutal years of survival. Emergency housing for families facing eviction. No questions asked, no means testing that humiliated people for being poor. Legal assistance for domestic violence victims, custody disputes, landlord harassment. Childcare that didn't evaporate the moment a kid got sick. Job training that recognized people needed time to build skills, not just workshops that taught resume writing and called it job placement. Mental health services that understood poverty was traumatic and treated it accordingly rather than blaming people for not being resilient enough. The foundation's first year served 847 families. Not thousands like some organizations claim with inflated numbers, but 847 real families with documentation showing they'd moved from crisis to stability. Claire visited regularly, not for photo opportunities, but to listen, to understand what worked and what needed adjustment. She hired people who'd been homeless themselves as staff and advisors, recognizing that lived experience was expertise the foundation needed. Mia helped too, now 10 years old and impossibly wise for her age. She volunteered in the children's programs, teaching younger kids to read, showing them that someone who'd slept in a car could go to private school and have a future that didn't include survival mode. She told them about the factory, about finding treasure in abandoned buildings, about mothers who kept fighting even when everything was falling apart. Claire watched her daughter become someone remarkable and felt the full weight of what Evelyn's gift had made possible. Not just wealth, though the money mattered. Not just security, though never worrying about rent or food or whether they could afford doctor visits had transformed their daily existence. But possibility itself, the chance to build something meaningful, to turn their suffering into protection for others, to prove that sometimes impossible things happened and you could choose to make them matter. The second year brought complications Claire hadn't anticipated. The foundation's success attracted attention from city officials wanting to partner on affordable housing initiatives. National organizations approached about expanding the model to other cities. Claire found herself testifying before state legislators about poverty policy, speaking at conferences about effective intervention strategies, becoming a voice for issues she'd lived but never expected to advocate about publicly. It was exhausting and exhilarating simultaneously. She hired consultants who understood nonprofit scaling, lawyers who navigated the complex regulations around charitable foundations, accountants who ensured every dollar was tracked and properly spent. The Philadelphia attorneys who defended her in court became ongoing advisors, helping structure the foundation for long-term sustainability rather than just good intentions. But Claire also learned that wealth didn't protect her from everything. Mia started having nightmares about losing the factory, about going back to the car, about Claire disappearing the way fathers disappeared and grandmother stayed distant and nothing good ever lasted. The school counselor called it trauma response, the delayed impact of years spent in survival mode. A child's brain couldn't process that safety was permanent when she'd learned that everything could be taken away. Claire found them a therapist who specialized in poverty trauma, who understood that Mia's fears weren't irrational but learned responses to real danger. Dr. Sarah Kim met with them weekly, helping Mia process what she'd experienced, helping Claire understand how to provide reassurance that penetrated deeper than words. "Your daughter is incredibly resilient," Dr. Kim explained during one session. "But resilience doesn't mean she's not wounded. She survived homelessness by learning to expect loss, to protect herself emotionally by not believing in permanence. Now, she has to relearn safety, and that's actually harder than learning survival. She has to trust that good things can last." The work was slow and sometimes painful. Mia would wake up crying about dreams where the factory was empty, where they were back in the car, where Claire was gone and she was alone. Claire would hold her daughter and recite facts like prayers. "We own the factory. Nobody can take it. I'm here. I'm not leaving. We're safe. We're staying safe." Gradually, over months and then a year, the nightmares decreased. Mia started sleeping through the night more often than not. She stopped hoarding food in her bedroom, stopped checking that the car was still in the parking lot, stopped asking if they had enough money for things that cost $3. She began to believe, really believe, that this life was permanent. It was during this period that Claire discovered something else in the factory. The hidden room Mia had found that first day. The crawl space behind Evelyn's closet filled with seal boxes. Claire had been so focused on the optical equipment and inventory that she'd forgotten about them. Now, with renovations expanding into Evelyn's former living quarters, contractors asked what to do with the boxes in the wall. Claire pulled them out, 6 boxes total, each one carefully sealed and labeled. Production Archives 1952 to 1967 was just the first. The others read: Personal Correspondence 1940 to 1990, Patent Documentation and Research Notes, Photographic Archive, Family and Business, Financial Records Complete, and Letters to Claire. Letters to Claire. She opened that box last, alone in the apartment after Mia had gone to bed, with the kind of dread that came from knowing you were about to read word from someone who'd never had the courage to say them out loud. Inside were envelopes, dozens of them, each one addressed to Claire Hendricks in Evelyn's precise handwriting, each one dated from the year of Claire's birth through the month before Evelyn's death. 28 years of letters never sent. Claire opened the first one, dated March 1996, 3 months after she was born. "Dear Claire, you're 3 months old today. Catherine sent a photograph to her father, my son Michael, though we're not speaking. He showed it to me, thinking it would hurt. Instead, it made me realize what I've lost. You have Catherine's eyes and my mother's expression, serious, even as a baby, like you're already judging the world and finding it wanting. I have no right to be part of your life, but I want you to know you were wanted, even by someone you'll never meet. Your grandmother, Evelyn." Claire read through years, chronicled in letters that traced her childhood from a distance. Evelyn writing about kindergarten reports Michael mentioned during the brief periods they were speaking. Elementary school achievements tracked through investigator reports Evelyn had. Hired after Catherine died. Middle school struggles documented with the painful awareness that Claire needed help Evelyn didn't know how to provide without inserting herself where she believed she didn't belong. The letters from Claire's teenage years carried a different weight. "Dear Claire, age 14, I learned you've entered foster care. Your father is in prison for assault. The social worker reports say you're taking care of Mia, refusing to be separated from her. I'm old now, 76, and I've been old for so long I'd forgotten what courage looked like. You have it. You're protecting your sister the way I failed to protect your mother. I'm establishing the trust today. The factory and everything in it will go to you. It's not enough, but it's what I have to give. Evelyn. The final letter was dated September 15th, 3 days before Evelyn died. Dear Claire, if you're reading this, you found everything. I hope you're strong enough to fight for it, because they'll try to take it. Barbara, Michael's wife, has been circling for years. She knows some of what's here, suspects more. She'll offer you pennies and claim it's generosity. Don't believe her. What I've left you is worth fighting for, not because of the money, but because it represents something important, work that mattered, quality that lasted, the idea that some things are worth doing perfectly even if the world doesn't appreciate it. You never knew me, and that's my fault, my failure. But I knew you. I watched you protect Mia through circumstances that would have broken most people. You have my stubbornness, but your mother's capacity for love. Maybe you can do what I never managed. Be strong without being alone. Be excellent without being isolated. The factory is yours. Use it however you want. Just don't let anyone tell you it's worthless, and don't let anyone tell you you're not worthy of it. With more love than I knew how to show, your grandmother, Evelyn Margaret Caldwell. Claire read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the careful handwriting. Evelyn had known her, had watched and cared from a distance, had built this gift with full awareness of what it meant and who it was for. The factory wasn't just an inheritance. It was an apology and a blessing and a vote of confidence, all wrapped into precise optical equipment and sealed fortunes. She filed the letters carefully, keeping them in the safe where important documents lived, and added one of her own to the collection. Future Claire might need to remember this moment, might need proof that she'd understood what Evelyn had been trying to say. Dear Evelyn, I found your letters. I wish you'd sent them. Wish we could have known each other. Wish pride and guilt hadn't kept us apart. But I understand why you did what you did. I made my own mistakes with Mia. Times I was too tired or stressed to be the mother she needed. Times I prioritized survival over connection. We're working through it together now, learning that love can be messy and imperfect and still real. The factory is extraordinary. Everything you built, everything you preserved, it's changing lives. Not just ours, though Mia and I would be lost without it, but hundreds of families who needed help the way I did. We're using what you left us to build something you'd recognize. Work that matters, quality that lasts, excellence in service to people instead of just profit. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for believing I was worth the gift. I hope wherever you are, you know you made the right choice. With gratitude and understanding, your granddaughter, Claire. The 3rd anniversary of the inheritance fell on a November morning that felt deliberately symbolic, cold and gray with the promise of snow. Claire stood in the factory's main floor, now transformed into a working museum that attracted optical researchers, manufacturing students, and people who simply appreciated craftsmanship that had transcended its era. The space was beautiful now. Skylights cleaned and restored flooded the floor with natural light. The machinery gleamed, maintained in operational condition by Robert Shun and the craftsmen he'd trained. Glass cases displayed examples of Evelyn's work. Telescope objectives that had mapped distant galaxies, microscope lenses that had revealed cellular structures, precision optics that had defended the country during Cold War tensions. But the most important display sat near the entrance. A timeline of Evelyn's life next to a timeline of Claire's life, the two narratives running parallel for 28 years without intersecting, then joining at the moment of inheritance. Photographs showed Evelyn at various ages, always in the factory, always surrounded by the work she'd loved more than family. And Claire at various ages, smiling in some photos and exhausted in others. Mia appearing when Claire was 19 and becoming the constant through everything that followed. The display ended with a photograph from last month. Claire and Mia standing in front of the factory, arms around each other, the building lit up behind them like a promise kept. The caption read, "Family separated by pride, reunited through legacy." The Caldwell Foundation serves 847 families in its first year, providing emergency housing, legal aid, and support services for single mothers. Evelyn Caldwell's final gift continues to change lives. The foundation had grown beyond anything Claire had initially envisioned. They'd expanded to 3 more cities, replicating the Camden model with local adjustments. They'd helped draft state legislation, improving protections for families facing eviction. They'd published research about effective poverty interventions that other organizations were using to improve their own programs. The work was real and documented and making measurable difference. Claire had hired a documentary crew to chronicle the foundation's first 3 years, wanting to capture not just success stories, but honest portrayals of how difficult the work was, how many setbacks accompanied progress, how helping people was complicated and messy and required. Hired after Catherine died. Middle school struggles documented with the painful awareness that Claire needed help Evelyn didn't know how to provide without inserting herself where she believed she didn't belong. The letters from Claire's teenage years carried a different weight. Dear Claire, age 14, I learned you've entered foster care. Your father is in prison for assault. The social worker reports say you're taking care of Mia, refusing to be separated from her. I'm old now, 76, and I've been old for so long I'd forgotten what courage looked like. You have it. You're protecting your sister the way I failed to protect your mother. I'm establishing the trust today. The factory and everything in it will go to you. It's not enough, but it's what I have to give. Evelyn. The final letter was dated September 15th, 3 days before Evelyn died. Dear Claire, if you're reading this, you found everything. I hope you're strong enough to fight for it, because they'll try to take it. Barbara, Michael's wife, has been circling for years. She knows some of what's here, suspects more. She'll offer you pennies and claim it's generosity. Don't believe her. What I've left you is worth fighting for, not because of the money, but because it represents something important, work that mattered, quality that lasted, the idea that some things are worth doing perfectly even if the world doesn't appreciate it. You never knew me, and that's my fault, my failure. But I knew you. I watched you protect Mia through circumstances that would have broken most people. You have my stubbornness, but your mother's capacity for love. Maybe you can do what I never managed. Be strong without being alone. Be excellent without being isolated. The factory is yours. Use it however you want. Just don't let anyone tell you it's worthless, and don't let anyone tell you you're not worthy of it. With more love than I knew how to show, your grandmother, Evelyn Margaret Caldwell. Claire read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the careful handwriting. Evelyn had known her, had watched and cared from a distance, had built this gift with full awareness of what it meant and who it was for. The factory wasn't just an inheritance. It was an apology and a blessing and a vote of confidence, all wrapped into precise optical equipment and sealed fortunes. She filed the letters carefully, keeping them in the safe where important documents lived, and added one of her own to the collection. Future Claire might need to remember this moment, might need proof that she'd understood what Evelyn had been trying to say. Dear Evelyn, I found your letters. I wish you'd sent them. Wish we could have known each other. Wish pride and guilt hadn't kept us apart. But I understand why you did what you did. I made my own mistakes with Mia. Times I was too tired or stressed to be the mother she needed. Times I prioritized survival over connection. We're working through it together now, learning that love can be messy and imperfect and still real. The factory is extraordinary. Everything you built, everything you preserved, it's changing lives. Not just ours, though Mia and I would be lost without it, but hundreds of families who needed help the way I did. We're using what you left us to build something you'd recognize. Work that matters, quality that lasts, excellence in service to people instead of just profit. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for believing I was worth the gift. I hope wherever you are, you know you made the right choice. With gratitude and understanding, your granddaughter, Claire. The 3rd anniversary of the inheritance fell on a November morning that felt deliberately symbolic, cold and gray with the promise of snow. Claire stood in the factory's main floor, now transformed into a working museum that attracted optical researchers, manufacturing students, and people who simply appreciated craftsmanship that had transcended its era. The space was beautiful now, Skylights cleaned and restored flooded the floor with natural light. The machinery gleamed, maintained in operational condition by Robert Shun and the craftsmen he'd trained. Glass cases displayed examples of Evelyn's work. Telescope objectives that had mapped distant galaxies, microscope lenses that had revealed cellular structures, precision optics that had defended the country during Cold War tensions. But the most important display sat near the entrance. A timeline of Evelyn's life next to a timeline of Claire's life, the two narratives running parallel for 28 years without intersecting, then joining at the moment of inheritance. Photographs showed Evelyn at various ages, always in the factory, always surrounded by the work she'd loved more than family. And Claire at various ages, smiling in some photos and exhausted in others. Mia appearing when Claire was 19 and becoming the constant through everything that followed. The display ended with a photograph from last month. Claire and Mia standing in front of the factory, arms around each other, the building lit up behind them like a promise kept. The caption read, "Family separated by pride, reunited through legacy." The Caldwell Foundation serves 847 families in its first year, providing emergency housing, legal aid, and support services for single mothers. Evelyn Caldwell's final gift continues to change lives. The foundation had grown beyond anything Claire had initially envisioned. They'd expanded to 3 more cities, replicating the Camden model with local adjustments. They'd helped draft state legislation, improving protections for families facing eviction. They'd published research about effective poverty interventions that other organizations were using to improve their own programs. The work was real and documented and making measurable difference. Claire had hired a documentary crew to chronicle the foundation's first 3 years, wanting to capture not just success stories, but honest portrayals of how difficult the work was, how many setbacks accompanied progress, how helping people was complicated and messy and required. The judge's final statement surprised her. The tragedy here isn't just the attempted fraud, though that's serious. The tragedy is that you had a chance to be part of something extraordinary, to reconnect with family you'd alienated, to participate in work that was changing lives, to be people who helped rather than hurt. Instead, you chose greed. You chose to see your niece and cousin as an obstacle rather than a human being. And now you've lost everything that mattered. Family, reputation, the chance to be part of a legacy that will outlast all of us. I hope you use your probation to reflect on those choices. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked if Claire felt vindicated. She thought about the question carefully before answering. I feel sad. Sad that it came to this, that people I should have been able to trust saw me as prey. But I also feel grateful for Evelyn's foresight, for the legal system working correctly for once, for friends and advisors who helped me fight back. Vindication isn't really the right word. Maybe validation. Validation that I was right to trust my instincts, right to refuse offers that seemed too good to be true, right to believe I deserved what I'd been given. She didn't mention that she'd established college funds for Barbara's grandchildren, kids who'd had no part in their parents' schemes, but would suffer the consequences anyway. Didn't mention the anonymous payments she'd made to cover Barbara's medical expenses when her appeals for help had circulated through family networks. Claire had learned that wealth meant having choices, including the choice to be generous to people who tried to destroy her, not because they deserved it, but because she could afford to be bigger than their worst behavior. Mia knew, though. She'd been the one to suggest it, her 11-year-old wisdom cutting through adult complications to simple truth. They were mean to us, but their grandkids didn't do anything wrong. And we have enough money that helping them doesn't hurt us. Out of the mouths of children who'd learned empathy in parking lots and laundromats. The Factory Museum celebrated its grand reopening in May of that year, fully renovated and expanded to include interactive exhibits about optical manufacturing, the history of American industry, and profiles of women in STEM fields. Evelyn's story anchored it all. The girl who'd started with nothing, built an empire through skill and determination, and left a legacy that transcended her personal failures. But they'd also added Claire's story over her objections. The museum included a small exhibit about inheritance, poverty, and the role of luck in determining life outcomes. It showed the Civic they'd lived in, donated by the mechanic who'd bought it after Claire had sold it for repair money. It displayed the eviction notice, the letter from the attorneys, the lowball offers for Barbara. It presented the full arc, desperation to discovery to vindication. Not as inspiration porn, but as documentation of systemic failures and exceptional outcomes. This exhibit exists because one family's story happened to have a happy ending, the introductory text explained. But thousands of families face similar circumstances without inheritances waiting. This room honors not just Claire and Mia's survival, but all the families still fighting. Proceeds from museum admission fund the Caldwell Foundation's ongoing work. The museum became a surprising success, attracting 30,000 visitors in its first year. School groups came to learn about manufacturing history. Optical researchers came to see equipment they'd only read about in textbooks. Families came to understand poverty in context rather than abstraction. And always, people left donations for the foundation. Small amounts, mostly $5 or $10, but they accumulated into significant support for the work. Claire walked the museum sometimes when it was empty, usually late afternoon when the last visitors had left and cleaning crews hadn't yet arrived. She'd stand in front of displays showing Evelyn's precision lenses or the timeline of their parallel lives and talk to the grandmother she'd never known. "We're doing okay, Evelyn. Mia's thriving. The foundation helped 2,000 families last year. We're expanding to 6 more cities. The work you did, it didn't just save us. It's saving people you never met, will never meet. People whose lives are better because you spent 30 years building something perfect and leaving it for someone you believed deserved it." She'd tell Evelyn about Mia's straight A's and her volunteer work and her plans to study social justice policy when she got to college. She'd talk about the foundation's challenges, funding complexities, staffing issues, the constant struggle to balance growth with quality. She'd admit her fears that somehow she'd screw it up, that the money would run out or the work would prove ineffective or she'd turn into someone who forgot what desperation felt like. And then she'd leave, walking back upstairs to the apartment where Mia was doing homework or reading or drawing in the notebook she'd filled with images of houses, all of them labeled home. The 5th anniversary celebration was Mia's idea. A combination party and fundraiser held in the factory's main floor, now set up with round tables and a small stage. They'd invited everyone who'd been part of the journey. Martin Caldwell and David Chun and Robert Chun and Frank Kozlowski. Dr. Kim and Sister Maria from the Tacoma shelter. The families who'd been served by the foundation, some of them still struggling, but all of them better off than they'd been. Reporters who'd covered the story fairly. Attorneys who'd defended Claire without charging fees they knew she couldn't afford at the time. Even Daniel showed up, the cousin who'd withdrawn from Barbara's lawsuit, who'd apologized and meant it. He and Claire had rebuilt something that wasn't quite family, but also wasn't nothing. Occasional emails, holiday cards, the acknowledgement that people could be wrong and grow from it if they were willing to do the work. Claire stood at the microphone with Mia beside her, looking out at 200 people gathered in a factory that had once represented abandonment and loss, and tried to find words adequate to the moment. 5 years ago, I inherited this factory when I was sleeping in my car with my daughter, facing eviction with $47 to my name. I thought I'd inherited a burden, another problem to solve, another weight to carry. Instead, I inherited a miracle. She gestured at the machinery surrounding them, still gleaming under professional lighting. My grandmother Evelyn built something extraordinary here. Not just an optical manufacturing business, though that was remarkable, but a legacy of excellence, of refusing to compromise quality even when it cost everything, of believing that some work was worth doing perfectly even if the world didn't appreciate it. Her voice caught, emotion threatening her carefully planned speech. Mia squeezed her hand, offering silent support, and Claire continued. Evelyn and I never met. She cut off my mother before I was born, and pride or guilt or both kept her from reaching out before she died. But she knew me anyway. She watched from a distance, saw me struggling, and decided I deserved help. The factory, worth almost $500 million, was her way of saying what she couldn't say out loud. You're worthy. You're strong. Build something that matters. Claire looked at the foundation staff, at the families they'd served, at the people who'd helped make the work possible. We've served over 3,000 families in 5 years. Provided emergency housing for people facing eviction. Legal aid for mothers escaping domestic violence. Childcare support so parents can actually work without losing their jobs when kids get sick. Job training that recognizes people need time to build skills. Mental health services that understand poverty is traumatic. She pulled Mia closer, her daughter now 12 and almost as tall as Claire. My daughter taught me something important during our homeless years. She'd draw pictures of houses, always houses, pages and pages of them, and label them home. Not because we had one, but because she believed someday we would. The kind of hope, that refusal to give up even when everything says you should, that's what drives the foundation's work. Mia took the microphone, surprising Claire. They hadn't planned this. But her daughter had that determined expression Claire recognized from every time Mia had decided something was important. I'm 12 years old. When I was 7, Mom and I lived in our car. I remember being hungry all the time. I remember kids at school asking why I wore the same clothes every day. I remember being afraid that someone would find out we were homeless and take me away from my mom. Her voice stayed steady, clear enough to carry to the back of the room. Great-Grandma Evelyn left us this factory because she saw that my mom kept fighting even when everything was terrible. She saw that Mom protected me and loved me and never gave up. And she left us enough money that we could protect and love other families the same way. Mia looked at Claire, then back at the crowd. People say we got lucky, and we did. But luck shouldn't be the only thing standing between families and disaster. The foundation exists because we remember what it felt like to have nothing, and we're using what we have now to help people who are where we were. That's what Great-Grandma Evelyn wanted. That's what Mom is building. And someday, when I'm old enough, that's what I'm going to help build too. The applause was thunderous. Claire pulled Mia into a hug while people stood and cameras flashed, and the moment crystallized into something that would be remembered, documented, held up as evidence that sometimes impossible things happened and you could choose to make them matter. Later, after the formal program ended and people mingled over donated food and drink, Robertson approached with something wrapped in cloth. He handed it to Claire with the reverence usually reserved for sacred objects. I made this for Evelyn in 1984, the year before I left the factory. She said it was too beautiful to sell, that she'd keep it for someone special. I think she meant you. Claire unwrapped the cloth to reveal a magnifying glass unlike any she'd seen. The lens was flawless, ground to optical perfection, mounted in a silver handle engraved with intricate patterns. But it was the image visible through the lens that made her breath catch. Robert had somehow ground the glass so that looking through it revealed a hidden pattern, words etched microscopically into the optical surface. To Claire, see clearly. Love, Evelyn. She had me add that in 1991, the year before she closed, Robert explained, his voice thick with emotion. She said if you ever found the factory, if you were strong enough to fight for it, she wanted you to have something that reminded you to see clearly both the world around you and yourself. Claire held the magnifying glass carefully, this final gift from a grandmother who'd loved her from a distance, and felt tears spill over despite her efforts at composure. See clearly. See yourself as worthy. See the world as changeable. See past the surface to what matters underneath. She looked around the factory, at Mia laughing with kids from the Foundation's youth program, at families who'd been homeless finding stability, at work that was real and documented and making measurable difference. She saw the machinery Evelyn had preserved and the legacy that had transformed from optical precision to social justice. She saw 5 years of impossible outcomes stacked on top of each other, all of it tracing back to one woman's decision to seal away a fortune and leave it to someone she believed would honor what it represented. I see clearly, Evelyn. Claire whispered to the grandmother who existed now only in photographs and precision optics and letters never sent. I see what you built. I see what you hoped for. I see what we're building from what you left us. Thank you for believing I could be the person you needed me to be. The story could end there. Triumph and vindication and tearful speeches in factories turned into museums. But life was messier than narrative closure. The work continued, harder and more complicated than Claire had anticipated when she'd first imagined the foundation. Families they helped sometimes struggled, sometimes failed despite intervention. Programs that worked in one city needed adjustment for another. Funding was always a challenge despite the inheritance, because nearly $500 million sounded infinite but wasn't when properly distributed across sustained programming in multiple cities. Claire learned to accept imperfection, to measure success in incremental improvements rather than complete transformation. She learned that helping people was complicated work that required humility, that sometimes despite your best efforts things went wrong, that good intentions weren't enough without sustained commitment and willingness to adapt when approaches didn't work. But she also learned that the work was worth doing, that even imperfect help was better than no help, that 3,000 families with stable housing and legal support and resources to build better lives were 3,000 families who might have been lost otherwise. She learned that wealth carried responsibility, but also possibility, that having money meant having choices about what kind of world you wanted to contribute to. Mia grew up surrounded by this work, internalizing lessons about privilege and poverty and the role of luck in determining outcomes. She was accepted to every college she applied to, finally choosing Columbia for its social policy program, determined to study the systems that created inequality rather than just mitigating its effects. Claire cried when Mia left for orientation, terrified and proud simultaneously, watching her daughter walk toward a future that had been impossible when they'd been sleeping in the Civic. But Mia came home for holidays and summers, working at the foundation with the same intensity she brought to everything. She interviewed families being served, documented outcomes, published research papers about effective intervention strategies. She became the data scientist the foundation needed, measuring impact with academic rigor while maintaining the human connection that came from having lived the experiences she was studying. "We're helping people," Mia told Claire during winter break of her sophomore year. "The data proves it. Families who receive comprehensive services are 7 times more likely to achieve housing stability than those receiving limited assistance." "But Mom, we're only reaching a fraction of the people who need help. The problem is so much bigger than even our resources can address." Claire had learned this truth painfully over 6 years of foundation work. Individual charity, no matter how well-funded, couldn't solve systemic poverty. The work they were doing mattered, changed specific lives, but it wasn't enough without broader policy changes. So the foundation's advocacy work intensified. They used their platform to push for legislation, universal child care, affordable housing mandates, healthcare reform, living wage requirements. They testified before Congress about poverty's real costs, brought families served by the foundation to share their stories, demanded that politicians treat housing and healthcare and childcare as rights rather than privileges dependent on luck. Some of it worked. A few cities passed ordinances protecting families facing eviction. State childcare subsidies expanded in 2 states where the foundation had documented need. Federal legislation remained frustratingly out of reach, blocked by representatives who believed poverty was a personal failing rather than a systemic issue. But Claire kept fighting, kept pushing, kept using the platform that came with her impossible story to demand better for people whose stories weren't ending with miraculous inheritances. She learned to be comfortable on camera, learned to translate complex policy into sound bites that resonated, learned to push back against narratives that celebrated individual triumph while ignoring the millions still struggling. "I was lucky," she told interviewer after interviewer, never letting them forget this central truth. "Evelyn's gift saved us. But we shouldn't need miracles. We should need a society that values children enough to feed them, values workers enough to pay them, values families enough to house them. That's what I'm fighting for now. Not more miraculous inheritances, but basic decency that makes miracles unnecessary." 10 years after the inheritance, Claire stood in the factory on a November morning that felt deliberately echoed that first day. cold and gray with the promise of snow. The building had evolved again, now housing not just the museum and foundation headquarters, but also a working optical laboratory where researchers continued Evelyn's legacy of precision optics. Robert Shun, now 86, still came in twice a week to teach apprentices the hand-grinding techniques Evelyn had perfected. He was training a new generation of craftspeople who understood that some work required human attention that machines couldn't replicate, that quality mattered more than efficiency, that excellence was worth pursuing even when the world preferred adequate at lower cost. The foundation had served over 8,000 families now, expanded to 12 cities, employed over 200 people. They'd helped draft legislation in 6 states, improving protections for families facing eviction. They'd published research that other organizations were using to improve their programs. They'd proven that properly resourced interventions could break cycles of poverty when given time and sustained support. But Claire's proudest achievement wasn't the numbers or the policies or even the lives changed. It was Mia, now 22, graduating from Columbia with a master's degree in social policy and joining the foundation's leadership team. Her daughter, who'd drawn houses and notebooks while living in a car, was now designing systems to ensure other children had actual homes. They stood together in the optical laboratory where Evelyn had spent decades perfecting lenses that could see farther and clearer than human eyes alone. Mia held the magnifying glass Robert had made, the one with Evelyn's hidden message ground into optical perfection. "Do you ever wish you'd known her?" Mia asked quietly. "Great-Grandma Evelyn, I mean. Do you wish she'd reached out before she died?" Claire considered the question honestly. "Sometimes. But I also think maybe the inheritance was better than having her in our lives would have been. She gave us resources but not baggage. Money but not complicated family dynamics. A gift without strings attached, without expectations beyond using it well." "You think that was intentional?" "I think she knew herself well enough to know she wasn't good at relationships. So she did what she was good at, building something perfect and leaving it for someone she hoped would appreciate it." Claire put her arm around Mia's shoulders. "And we did appreciate it. We took what she left us and built something she'd recognize. Work that matters, quality that lasts, excellence in service to people instead of just profit." They walked back to the apartment. Their apartment still, though Claire had purchased a house in Philadelphia suburbs that sat mostly empty because they both preferred the factory, preferred the connection to Evelyn, to the work, to the reminder of where they'd started and how far they'd come. Dinner was simple. Pasta and salad. Nothing fancy despite the millions in managed assets. They'd learned during homeless years to find satisfaction in enough rather than excess, and wealth hadn't changed that instinct toward simplicity. They ate while watching snow fall outside windows that no longer leaked cold air, and talked about the foundation's next expansion, about Mia's research findings, about the presentation they were giving to Congress next month. After dinner, Claire returned to the tradition she'd maintained for 10 years, writing a letter to Evelyn that would be filed with all the others, documentation of a relationship that existed across time and death. "Dear Evelyn, 10 years today since I inherited the factory. Mia's 22 now, brilliant and passionate, and exactly the kind of person you'd want carrying your legacy forward. We've helped 8,000 families, but Mia's right, it's not enough. The systemic issues creating poverty are bigger than our resources can address. But we're fighting, using the platform your gift gave us to demand better. I hope wherever you are, you know what you started. I hope you know that the granddaughter you never met sees you clearly, flawed and brilliant and generous in the only way you knew how to be. Thank you for watching from a distance. Thank you for believing I was worth the gift. Thank you for sealing away a fortune and leaving it to someone you decided deserved it. You were right. Your granddaughter, Claire. She filed the letter in the safe with all the others. 10 years of one-sided conversation with a grandmother who existed now only in photographs and precision optics and the foundation that bore her name. Someday, maybe, someone would read these letters and understand how complicated love could be, how generosity could flow through inheritance rather than relationship, how you could honor someone you'd never met by building something they'd recognize. But tonight, Claire closed the safe and climbed into bed next to Mia, who'd fallen asleep reading policy papers. She turned off the light and lay in darkness, listening to the factory settle around them. Decades of accumulated history in wood and metal and brick, all of it holding them with the patient certainty of things built to last. They'd survived homelessness and found fortune. They'd fought off predators and built something meaningful. They'd taken Evelyn's impossible gift and transformed it from optical precision to social justice, from individual salvation to community support. It wasn't perfect. Nothing human ever was. But it was real and documented and making measurable difference in people's lives. And that, Claire thought as sleep finally claimed her, was enough. More than enough. It was exactly what Evelyn had hoped for when she'd sealed away a fortune and left it to someone she believed would see clearly, both the world around her and herself. The factory stood guard through the night, 3 stories of brick and history and promise kept. Inside, 2 people who'd been homeless slept in safety and warmth. Around them, 8,000 families worked to build stability from chaos. Behind them, 10 years of impossible outcomes stacked like evidence that sometimes miracles happened and you could choose to make them matter. And ahead of them, morning would come again, cold and gray, perhaps with the promise of snow. But morning always came, bringing with it the chance to continue work that mattered, to help one more family find stability, to fight for systems that made miracles unnecessary. Claire had learned many things in 10 years. That wealth was complicated. That poverty was systemic. That family was what you built, not just what you were born into. That excellence mattered even when the world preferred adequate. That you could be flawed and generous simultaneously. That sometimes the best gift was one left by someone who knew they weren't good at giving directly. But the most important lesson came from Evelyn's hidden message, ground into optical glass with such precision it lasted decades. See clearly. Claire was seeing clearly now, seeing the work that remained, the lives that needed helping, the systems that needed changing, seeing her daughter becoming someone remarkable, seeing the factory transformed from abandonment to legacy, seeing the invisible lines connecting past to present to future, all of them anchored in one woman's decision to seal away a fortune for someone she believed deserved it. And in the morning, they'd wake up and get back to work. Because that's what you did with impossible gifts. You honored them by using them well, by building something that lasted, by proving that the person who believed in you had chosen correctly. The snow continued falling, covering Camden in white, transforming the industrial neighborhood into something almost beautiful. Inside the factory, Claire and Mia slept peacefully, safely, permanently. And somewhere in the building's accumulated history, in the precision optics still stored in the laboratory, in the letters filed carefully in the safe, Evelyn's presence lingered, pride and hope and satisfaction that her final gift had found exactly the right home. The factory had been waiting 32 years for someone to claim it. Claire had been homeless and desperate when she'd inherited. But both had found purpose in each other, had transformed abandonment into legacy, had proved that sometimes impossible things happened and became exactly what they were supposed to be. This was the happy ending, but it was also the beginning of work that would continue, of lives that would be changed, of a legacy that would outlast them all. And that, more than any amount of money or optical precision or miraculous inheritance, was what mattered most. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.